Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell. Brought to you by...
When Signs and Displays Direct was launched 15 years ago, it featured a complete line of banners and stands, product displays, and more. Today, the company is known as SDD and is the industry leader in turnkey, no-inventory POP programs. SDD has expanded into branding programs for both corporate and private label, as well as consulting services for retail showroom design and more. Visit sdd-us.com. That's sdd-us.com. All right, time once again for Music Night at the Majestic, and with us once again is friend of Music Night, Mr. Jim Vallance. Jim, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here.
Tell you what, when you were on before, we had so many people that said that were so enamored with the stories behind the songs. So this time around, let's focus on that. How's that sound?
Perfect. Let's do it.
All right. Well, tell you what, why don't we start with an Aerosmith song? Let's go with Deuces Are Wild. What's the story behind that one?
Deuces Are Wild. I have to remember what year that was. Late 80s, early 90s, I think. And it was Christmas, between Christmas and New Year. And it was a quiet time. And I went down to my studio one day and just had a bunch of ideas just pop into my head. So I recorded them, and one of them was just a track without any lyrics, just music. I played guitar, bass, drums, and put a few things together. And I was thinking of Aerosmith when I did it. So this is way before MP3s were invented and the internet was quite primitive. So I actually put the idea on a cassette tape and popped it in the mail to Steven Tyler, and he was living near Boston at the time. And so Steven, I guess about a week later, gets this cassette tape in the mail, and he pops it in his Walkman, and he's got the headphones on, and it was a winter day in the Boston area. So he's doing exercise in his basement gymnasium, like on his treadmill, with the headphones on, listening to this track I had done, and he's kind of singing along with it. And he said by the end of his walk, he had like a melody sketched out. So he put that on a tape and sent it back to me, and then we kind of bounced the idea back and forth for a week or two. Again, if this had been, internet MP3 days, we could have done it quicker, just online. But this was like this, slow Pony Express way of doing things. Anyway, long story short, we end up with a song, and Aerosmith are going in the studio fairly soon. For reasons I don't understand, they ended up not doing Deuces Are Wild. Deuces Are Wild. It kind of got left off the album. But a couple of years later, they got asked to contribute a song to a film. And they didn't have anything kicking around. So Steven thought, let's just give them Deuces Are Wild. But they hadn't recorded the song properly. All they had was the demo I had done in my basement with Steven's vocal on it. So I think they might have gone into Joe's home studio and put a few more guitars on and released it in that fashion. So the released version is me playing guitar, bass, and drums with a few more guitars from Joe Perry. And I think Joey, the drummer, put some fills on. But it's basically just it was never meant to be released. It was the demo. But I do now remember why it didn't go on the album. John Clodner, who was the A&R guy at Aerosmith's label, he was very opinionated and really powerful in terms of deciding what went on an album and what didn't. And Clodner was a bit of a legend back then, a very interesting guy, long hair, long beard, always dressed in white. If you remember John Lennon from the cover of Abbey Road, I think John Clodner was basically just channeling Lennon.
He was a character.
He really was. He was really something. And he said, and he had an interesting way of speaking too. I won't even begin to mimic his voice, but it was like, Deuces Are Wild. I don't like the title. You need to change the title or it's not going on the album. And Steven and I really liked the title. And we said to John, no, we're not changing it. And so he said, okay, it's not going on the album. So that was it. That was why it got excluded from the album first go around. But a couple of years later, I think it was a different label that requested the song for this insertion in the movie soundtrack. So there was no argument there. So it went on the album, this soundtrack album, and it's out there if you want to look for it and hear it. And it's basically me, Stephen, and Joe, the basement demo that ended up being an unintended master.
Yeah. Now tell me this: did you get music credit for playing all the instruments on the track?
No, I didn't. And what's interesting is people who aren't in the music business wouldn't necessarily know this, but there's a couple of different ways of getting income from music. So one, you write the song and you're credited as the songwriter, and every time an album sells or someone buys the song on Apple iTunes or a number of other ways, if it plays on the radio, you get a royalty. And the artist who is in the band, they get what's called an artist royalty for sales of the physical product or online product. But people who aren't in the band, aren't signed to the record contract, but say contribute to an album. For example, I played guitar, bass, and drums on Deuces Are Wild, and you get what's called neighboring rights. You get a royalty for having played on the recording, but you have to register with a company called Sound Exchange, I think. And you have to have proof. You have to send them an image of the album sleeve or the credits or something. And then, but without that, there's no proof that you actually played on the recording. So I would love to get paid for having played on Deuces Are Wild, but I have no proof that I did it. It's not, I wasn't credited in the liner notes. So that's one thing.
Yeah. Do you at least get a kick out of, hearing, would you hear this song, played someplace, knowing that that's your demo?
Yeah. It's funny to hear, again, it was never intended for release. So it's fun to hear it on the radio and know where it came from. And of course people think it's Aerosmith, but it's, Aerosmith.
It's you.
With me.
with those guys.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of like I was watching the This Is Herb Alpert documentary.
Yeah.
And they were talking about working with Sam Cooke. Yeah, and I believe it was Herb saying how the what was released as What a Wonderful World was actually just the demo track for it. But because Sam had been signed to RCA, and the little label that he was on prior to that is scrambling, trying to find some stuff to put out because, hey, Sam's hot, we're going to make some money. They put it out, but that was just a demo track.
And sometimes it happens, I think Tommy James and the Shondells, My Baby Does the Hanky Panky. I think that was just a garage demo, and it got released.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's like sometimes you'll spend hours, like with the Cars Heartbeat City album.
Yeah,
where an entire day would be spent just on one guitar riff, basically, and it's a song's a big hit, but then you can have the demo, cut in somebody's home studio, becomes a hit too. I mean, you just don't know.
Yeah, it's just wherever the magic falls. I mean, it's not something you can plan sometimes. Yeah, I know a number of examples where they just they couldn't improve on the demo. So yeah, it happens.
Well, I'll tell you, another song that you did with Stephen was The Other Side. Tell us about that one.
That was from the same sort of between Christmas and New Year's little burst of inspiration that I had. So I think I recorded 4 tracks in those 4 or 5 days, all of them with Aerosmith in mind. And I'm trying to remember 3 of them, well, 2 for sure. So Deuces Are Wild and The Other Side. Stephen also took The Other Side, and I mailed that to him, and he mailed it back to me. And the first thing I said when I got it back was, "No, Stephen, you got it wrong. You sang the chorus over the verse, and you sang the verse over the chorus. It's backwards." And Stephen said, "You know what? I think it's great the way it is." And it took me a day or 2, but he was right. It was better his way. Now that song, The Other Side, Aerosmith did record properly, and you'd have to remind me what album it was on. Pump,
was that on Pump?
Yeah. So the album comes out, and we get a phone call, or the lawyers get a phone call from Motown. And they say, sorry, guys, your song sounds an awful lot like one of our songs, which is like the other side is, take me, what enough of foolish pride, take me to the other side. The notes are A, B, C, D, E. And so is Standing in the Shadows of Love. Standing in the Shadows of Love. So Motown said, you've infringed on our melody, and
We want some money.
yeah. So we didn't think anybody owns A, B, C, D, E. I mean, come on, Motown doesn't own that. So we were going to fight it, and Stephen's legal team said, "Look, don't even think about fighting Motown. You're not going to win. So it's going to cost you thousands and thousands to fight it, and you're going to lose. So you might as well just fold." So we did. So that song is credited to Steven Tyler, Jim Vallance, and Holland Ozzy or Holland. So I mean, it's nice to have my name on the same.
I was just going to say, the upside is you got your name next to Holland Dozier Holland, which is not a bad place to be.
Truly. Now, the other people that were sued for the same thing were Kiss for "I Was Made for Love," A, B, C, D, E. So Motown sued them too. So we're in good company.
Oh man! Well, hey, you mentioned Kiss. You did a song that they did, War Machine. Tell us about that one.
Well, actually, 3 songs with Kiss, but I think that was the first one. So again, this is 1982, I think, very, very early in my songwriting relationship with Bryan Adams. In fact, before he had any real success. His first sort of big success was Cuts Like a Knife, which happened in 83. But in 82, we were still kind of just working our way up the ladder. So the phone rings one day, and my wife says, "It's Michael Jackson." What? So I take the phone and go, "Hello?" He goes, "Hi, this is Michael James Jackson." Different Michael Jackson. I didn't know him, but apparently he was and still is a Canadian record producer. And he'd been hired to produce Kiss's next album, which I think ended up being called Creatures of the Night. And he said, "Look, I'd love you and Bryan to jump in on some of the songwriting." He knew of Bryan and I because he was Canadian, and he had recommended Bryan and I to Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley. So Gene sends us a little idea he has. It was very primitive. Just as I remember, it was a riff on a synthesizer or something, which we transformed over or transposed over to guitar. And we're sort of channeling. I mean, I'm not now, nor have I ever been, a big Kiss fan. I mean, certainly respect for their success, and how can you not know who Kiss are? But I never really followed them other than the singles I'm aware of. But we kind of channeled what we thought was kind of a Kiss vibe. So we came up with this sort of hellacious lyric, and War Machine, and anyway, it was right up Gene's alley. He loved it, and so we put that together. And I just heard recently, all these years later, that War Machine was on their last tour was their sort of big song. There was a big video thing on the stage behind them, and they still do it. And it's actually one of the key moments in their live show. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then that worked out. So Gene asked us if we had anything else, and I had a song that I'd written for Bachman Turner Overdrive called "Rock and Roll Hell," which I thought might also kind of ring a bell for Kiss. So sent that to Gene, and Bryan helped add a bridge to the song before we sent it down. And Gene phoned us and said, "I love it, perfect for our album. There's just one problem. It needs a third verse." And Bryan and I had only written 2 verses, but Bryan and I looked at each other and went, "Doesn't need a third verse." and we told Gene, we think it's fine the way it is. And Gene says, "You don't understand. It needs a third verse, and I'm going to write it." So it was clear that if Gene wasn't credited as a writer, then it wasn't going on the album. So we learned to kind of play that game. Again, this is early in our career, so we learned sometimes you have to give up a give up a bit. And it wasn't unfair. I mean, Gene legitimately wrote a third verse and was credited, and we were very happy to have the song on the album. But so those were our Kiss songs, and again, a great break for us early in our career.
Yeah, well, tell you what, you mentioned that it was a Canadian connection that got War Machine, connected to Kiss in the first place. Another fellow Canadian that you wrote with was Michael Buble. So a bit of a difference in tone and personality there, but I suppose there is that connection.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting sort of juxtaposition, Kiss to Michael Buble, and I mean, it's to make a living in the music business is not easy. It's probably one of those professional sports. Only a few people get to actually make a living at it. And what I realized early in my career was, as a songwriter, is you're going to have to cast a wide net. You're going to have to be able to write for Kiss one week and write for Michael Buble the next, and just shift gears. And really, at the end of the day, a song is a song. Right. If it holds together melodically and lyrically, it's not that it can cross barriers. I mean, sometimes a song can be a pop hit and a country hit and so on.
Right.
I can change gears. And with Buble, I was a huge fan of his. His first big hit was a song called "Home," if you know that one. A great song, and he wrote it with David Foster's daughter Amy. Really good song. And Michael, even though I hadn't met him before, he was just basically up the street. I mean, just lived a few miles from Bryan and I in British Columbia, Canada. Mm-hmm. And he was discovered by our Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, at the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Brian Mulroney was at a friend's daughter's wedding, and Michael Buble was singing at the wedding. He was hired, he was in the wedding band. And and Prime Minister Mulroney went up to him and said, "Kid, you sing great. I'd like you to meet my friend David Foster." So Mulroney introduced Buble to David Foster, and the rest is history. Foster produced him, and he became a huge star. And so anyway, 2 or 3 albums further down the road, Buble is also by this time managed by Bruce Allen, who also manages Bryan Adams. So Buble was pretty much finished recording an album. And one of the key songs from the album was called, "Two Bedroom Apartment." And Buble's manager, Bruce, said, "I'm not sure about that title." And,
it doesn't exactly roll off the tongue.
Yeah. So Buble agreed to send it over to me and Bryan. And we sat down with it, and we rewrote the chorus. And our new title was called "After All," which had just a little easier, as you say, rolls off the tongue a little easier. So in the course of doing that, I finally got to meet Buble, and just the nicest guy. I mean, he is really sweet, really funny, just easy to get along with, and of course, hugely talented. I mean, great singer.
Yeah, he is one of the people. Our viewers will send in messages. You should. We'd love to see if you interview so and so. We think they'd be a really interesting interview. And Michael is one of the people that constantly comes up. He really has a way to build a bond, with his fans.
Yeah, he's just such a nice guy. And I mean, speaking of nice guys, not to change subject too quickly here, but Alice Cooper is another one. Just again, in the whole music business, he's just one of the nicest guys. Just kind, generous, thoughtful. A dad, coaches baseball, plays golf. I mean, just a sweet man.
Yeah. The fact that he and Glenn Campbell were such good friends. There's that famous picture of them running the red light there in Phoenix. I don't know if they were like on the way to the golf course or coming back. So they played golf together all the time. And one of the red light cameras caught them. And in the photo, you see Glenn and Alice both kind of looking up to see if the camera caught them. It's a very funny picture. But
I'll search for that.
But it's two guys that you never would associate with one another.
Well, I mean, Alice, one of his best friends was Groucho Marx.
Wow.
Alice tells stories. He knew everybody. I remember I was working with him. Dan Quayle. He was what, George W. Bush's vice president. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, HW. Yeah,
HW. And Quayle was getting a lot of bad press around that time. I can't remember why, but there had been some gaffe. He had said
he made a few.
Yeah, and so he was getting a lot of bad press. And Alice was up working with me in Canada, and we were having a conversation about U.S. politics. And I said, "Boy, that's rough. What about that Dan Quayle?" And Alice said, "Oh, he's a great guy. I played golf with him last week." So, I mean, literally, there's almost no one you can bring up that Alice doesn't know them somehow.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. Great guy, super guy.
Yeah, well, it's funny as you tell that story. I'm picturing Alice with the boa constrictor, draped over his shoulders from the stage show.
Yeah.
Out playing golf with the vice president of the United States.
Well, he's just normal. When he goes out, he puts his hair in a ponytail, puts a baseball cap, and you really wouldn't know him. I was in a restaurant with him one time having dinner, and the waitress kind of went, do I know you from somewhere? And he said, "I'm Alice Cooper." Like, just no airs about him at all,
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. Well, I'll tell you, another character that you wrote with was Ozzy Osbourne.
Oh boy, character.
Tell us about writing "I Just Want You."
I love Ozzy. I mean, I had the best time with him. We hung out quite a bit. We wrote a few songs. I got a call from Michael Buble, a producer. He had done Black Hole Sun for Soundgarden, and he was going to be producing Ozzy's next album. So he rang me up and said, "Would you like to write with Ozzy?" And it's like, yeah, I mean, again, like Kiss, I wasn't a huge Ozzy fan. Not that I didn't like him. I just, hadn't really paid attention to anything other than the singles, the songs that you would know from the radio. But anyway, Ozzy came up to Vancouver, and I mean, you don't quite know what to expect, but he was Ozzy. He was exactly what you'd expect. And the only thing is, he comes across from the reality show. He comes across like a little bit of a sort of bumbling kind of, not the sharpest guy, but he's really, really smart, really sharp. He's no dummy at all. Really talented, great guy to sit down and write with. Got great ideas for melodies and lyrics, but he is a character, and again, funny. You just laugh the whole time. You have to stop laughing long enough to actually write a song, because he knows he's funny. And he loves being funny, and he will just keep you going for as long as he can. So,
well, I know on your website you mentioned about going out to dinner, you and your wife, and then you were working with Chicago.
Yes.
And Jimmy Pankow and the guys went out, and on your site you mentioned that Jimmy's a really funny guy too. So now
really is.
Yeah, what happened that night? What was that like when you got two legendary guys in the music business who are just both hysterically funny?
Well, first of all, you wouldn't think that Ozzy and Chicago would get along or even be on the same page, but Chicago were recording in the big room in my studio, and my friend Bruce Fairburn was producing them, and I was in the smaller room writing with Ozzy. So everyone would kind of see each other cross paths in the lobby, or grabbing a coffee or something. So one night we all decided to go out for dinner, and so the guys from Chicago and Ozzy and the two guys that really hit it off and just could not stop trying to up each other on the funny meter with Jimmy Pankow and Ozzy. And I mean, I was afraid they were going to kick us out of the restaurant. We were laughing so loud. I mean, in my whole career, in all the time I've been in the music business, all the people I've spent time with, I think that night was maybe one of the most enjoyable, with Jimmy and Ozzy just keeping everybody in stitches for the whole time. So then, I mean, they just got along like a house on fire. So back at the studio for the next week or two, it was just like, best friends and really a good hang.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, when you were writing that, there was all the little couplets on there. You know,
Yeah.
yeah, you mentioned that it's like you and Ozzy would just kind of like bounce things off and just kind of got progressively funnier, cracking each other up as you went on, correct?
Yeah, the song is just, the lyric is built from little couplets, like little rhyming couplets, and we just sat there for hours and hours and came up with probably 20 or 30 couplets, only 5 or 6 of which made it into the song. But the longer we sat and tried to come up with 2 lines that rhymed, and it kind of got a little silly on a few occasions, and a little bit inappropriate. So those are the ones that didn't make it into the song. But again, spending any amount of time with Ozzy, you got to have a laugh.
That's great. Well, I'll tell you, moving on to another song that you wrote that has an interesting backstory would be Bonnie Raitt's "No Way to Treat a Lady." Tell us about that one.
Yeah, Bryan and I think I got to think back. I think we might have written it with Kim Carnes in mind, if I recall, and maybe Stevie Nicks. But those were both a no-go. And somehow it found its way to Bonnie Raitt, which is great. And she recorded it. And Christine McVie from Fleetwood Mac sang backing vocals on it. It wasn't quite a duet, but Christine was on the recording with Bonnie. And Bryan and I were really excited. And then Bonnie got into a bit of a tussle with her record company. There was some disagreement, contractual disagreement, and the record company pulled the album. They locked it up and wouldn't let Bonnie release it. Bonnie went to another label and recorded the whole album again from scratch. And it's good, but I heard, if you've never heard the other version, then you have nothing to compare it to. But the first version of No Way to Treat a Lady is better than the re-recorded version. And the second one doesn't have Christine McVie on it. So, I'm really happy to have a Bonnie Raitt song in my catalog, but I just wish the first one had been released. It was just enough of a difference to be better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, now another song that had a different life, where it was recorded multiple times, was it started out as Jamaica, but then Rick Springfield got a hold of it and turned it into Christina. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, that's similar. That was from the same writing session. Interesting you mentioned that, because I actually sort of forgot. There were 2 songs from BTO that I wrote. One was called Rock and Roll Hell, which we just talked about, and Kiss ended up doing that with some changes. And the other one was Jamaica, that was also recorded by BTO. I didn't realize, I was talking to Rick actually just maybe 6 months ago. I didn't realize how that song first came to his attention. So he said he's on an airplane flying from one gig to the next, and his guitar player is sitting next to him. And his guitar player said, "You should check out this song, Jamaica. I really like it." And Rick listened to it and said, "I really like it too. I just don't like the title." So Rick rang me up and said, "Listen, I'd love to record your song, Jamaica. Do you mind if I rewrite the lyrics and change the title to Christina?" And I said, "Absolutely, please, be my guest," which he did, and ended up on his second album. And to this day, Christina either closes the show or is the encore song. So it's he plays it every set that he does, every concert. So I'm really pleased about that. And another great guy. I love Rick. He's a super guy. And he and I really hit it off because he's a huge Beatle fan, and so am I. We to this day, we trade Beatle stories. Anything that comes on the internet that's interesting, we'll send one guy, will send it to the other, and we sort of, that's our common thing, Rick and I.
Yeah, well, I know. I just heard an interview with him where he's got he had just gotten a rare copy of Yesterday Today.
Yeah, the original cover, right?
Yeah.
With the new cover pasted over. If Beatle fans know that those are like one of the rarest things.
Yeah.
The Beatles released an album with what was the record company deemed to be an inappropriate picture. So they just pasted a new picture over the top. So if you have one of those,
you got something
worth a bundle. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's another guy too that we have a very vocal female audience who wants Rick on the show. Well, so they let us know.
Rick's got great stories, and he's just a lovely, lovely guy. So I hope we can do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, I'll tell you, switching gears again, Joan Jett, Eye to Eye.
Joan.
Now, how did you come to write with Joan?
That was interesting. Her manager, record label guy, co-writer, producer, his name is Kenny Laguna. He does all of those things for Joan. And Kenny rang me up one day and said, would you like to write with Joan Jett? And this sounds like I'm telling the same story over and over again, but the answer was, of course, I'd love to.
Well, yeah, you don't say no.
No, I don't think I've ever said no, to be honest. So he said, okay, we're going to be in Vancouver next week for, they're doing some radio promo or something. Why don't you come and say hi? And then we'll book, not on that visit, we'll book another visit to come up and write with you. So the day comes and I go down to the hotel and knock on the door, and Kenny opens the door and said, come on in. And Joan's sitting over in the corner and reading a newspaper. And Kenny says, Joan, say hi to Jim. And Joan goes, hi, Jim. And looks back at her newspaper. And actually, I'm kind of telling a story out of school here, but I'll carry on. Kenny says, Joan, you're going to be writing with Jim. And she goes, what? You never told me that. Like, it was like, suddenly got very awkward.
Oh, by the way.
Yeah. Got very awkward. And they had a little bit of a back and forth. And so anyway, Kenny said, okay, we're going to go out and have a bite. Joan, you want to join us? She goes, no, she's going to stay in the room. So Kenny and I go out and have dinner. We get along just fine. And a couple of weeks later, they come back up to Vancouver, and everything's fine by then. And Joan is really hard to get to know. She's got a kind of a coat of armor. First of all, I think she's really shy. I think she's painfully shy. But once you get to know her, she is the sweetest woman. But it just takes a while. So the three of us are writing in my studio, me and Kenny and Joan, because Kenny writes as well with Joan. And she's just not being very communicative. And it's a little bit awkward. Anyway, my 3-year-old son comes down to the studio. It was in the basement of my house at the time. And he comes in and Joan melts. Oh, and she wants to hold my son. And from that moment on, she kind of opened up. And over time, I did get to know her, and I adore her. She's just such a lovely, lovely person. But getting to know her is really hard.
Yeah,
it's hard to get past that wall that she has up. But once you do, just the sweetest lady, and so talented. She's the greatest guitar player. Her rhythm guitar playing is just solid. And her voice, no vibrato, but impeccably in tune.
Yeah.
I love her vibe. She's a real rock and roll original. She's the real deal.
Yeah, well, her vocals are a force of nature.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, another famous female who you had another hit with was Tina Turner on "It's Only Love." How did that come about? Because that was another song you had done with Bryan. How did it end up being the duet?
Well, it was Bryan was recording his Reckless album, and "It's Only Love" was on the album, and it had already been recorded, so the track was laid down, and Bryan had laid down a vocal. And I don't know who suggested it. It just kind of came up, like, wouldn't it be great to have Tina Turner sing on this? And I think if we had asked her a month later, it would have been a no. But we caught her just literally weeks before What's Love Got to Do with It went to the top of the charts. So if you remember her story, I mean, it's a really sad but inspiring story where, her first band, Ike and Tina Turner, was huge. And then she left Ike, who was an abusive husband. And she had a couple of rough years. She was cleaning hotel rooms for a living. And I wish I could remember the name of her manager. This Australian fellow took her under his wing to bring her back, career-wise. And he worked extremely hard to do that. And when we encountered her, she was opening for, her album had been recorded, but it hadn't really taken off yet. And she was opening for Lionel Richie, and they were performing in Vancouver. And Bryan put the word out and got a hold of her manager and said, I'd love it if she could sing on this song we got. So she came down to the studio, and I thought she was 6 feet tall. She's like 5 feet tall. It's amazing sometimes when you meet people,
Mm-hmm.
you think these stars are giants because she looks so tall. But anyway, but big voice. Big, small body, big voice. She just belted. So she came down, and the song was in Bryan's key, so it was too low for her. And at first we thought, oh, this isn't going to work. And she said, let me try something. And she didn't take it up an octave, but she took the melody up about a major third or something into her range. And then suddenly it just worked. And she nailed it in about half an hour. She was out of there. And it was just to see that talent in the flesh and see her doing her thing. Whoa, very, very, very memorable moment.
I would.
Yeah, nicest person, sweet, sweet lady.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, when Private Dancer, the LP hit, it was just unbelievable.
Yeah. And it did hit, as I say, a few weeks after that. Suddenly she was the biggest thing on the planet, which is why I say, I think if we'd, asked her 2 weeks later, she would have been too busy to even do it.
Yeah.
So it was a stroke of luck. And then Bryan toured with her after that, and they would do that song every night on tour.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'll tell you, kind of the polar opposite, career-wise, for somebody, was Taylor Hicks recorded a song of yours.
Yeah, Taylor was an American Idol winner. So, I was unaware of him, but I was an American Idol fan. So I would watch the show every week, season after season. And I actually had made little scorecards, and I would keep track of each singer and make a prediction about how far they would go. I was really into it. I was a big fan of the show. So I remember this guy coming out early on for an audition, young guy with gray hair, a little unusual, and real shy. If you remember, I don't know if you remember the show, but he kind of shuffles out, and Randy said, what are you going to do? He says, I'm going to do a Sam Cooke song. And they said, well, Sam Cooke's one of your influences? He goes, yeah. He says, I like Sam Cooke, and I like Ray Charles, and I like Joe Cocker. And Bryan and I had just written a song with nobody in mind. I got to think about it. I know. I think we'd written it for Ray Charles. That was the whole thing. Yeah, we got asked to write a song for Ray Charles, so we wrote this song called "The Right Place" for Ray Charles. We sent it off, and he didn't do it. And so then we sent it to Joe Cocker, and he didn't do it. So the song's sitting on the shelf. So when I heard Taylor Hicks say, I like Ray Charles and Joe Cocker, like right away, a bell went off. We got a song for you. But this was early in the American Idol season. So, week to week, Taylor keeps going up and up and up and up and up. And a few months later, he wins American Idol. So I've still got this idea in my head that have we got a song for you? So I sent it to his producer, Matt Serletic, and Matt got back to me and said, I don't think it's right for Taylor. It's like, oh man, that was a real disappointment. So you just chalk it up like, okay, well, win some, lose some. But 2 weeks later, Matt called back and said, you know what, we listened to it again, we changed our mind, we've recorded it. And it ended up being sort of the single off of Taylor's album, which was just great. And then I never did get to meet Taylor, but I talked to him on the phone a couple of times and thanked him for doing the song and saw him on Good Morning America performing it and a few other times. So yeah, that was a real treat. But one of those things where, same with What About Love that I wrote for Heart. First band didn't do it, got sent to Heart. They didn't like it, but changed their mind and recorded it. So every song kind of of mine has a similar story where the first one or two times, it's a no-go, and you think, okay, I guess that's it for that song. And then just by sheer luck, somebody else hears it and ends up recording it, and they all usually end up having a happy ending.
Yeah. Well, the thing is you just never know.
Truly.
Kind of like, you talk about Michael Buble. He's in a wedding band playing at a wedding. Who thinks that's going to turn into where the prime minister hears you and you end up with a career?
That is a great story. It really is. Yeah.
I'll tell you, another group that you worked with was the Go-Go's.
Yeah, that was good fun. I got invited to a songwriters camp, basically. Miles Copeland, who was the brother of the drummer in the Police, Stewart, and Miles also managed the Police, and must have made a whole bunch of money because he bought this beautiful castle in the south of France. And when I say castle, I mean
a legit castle.
Yeah, it had originally been a Roman fort, and then there'd been a castle built on top of the Roman fort, and then it had been added onto this, like towers and drawbridges. I mean, it was like a full-on castle. And so once a year, he would invite 30 songwriters to go to his castle, and we would spend 10 days there, eat too much, drink too much, and write songs. And I got to write with John Bon Jovi and the Go-Go's, among others. So the Go-Go's, we wrote a couple of songs at the castle, but stayed in touch afterwards. And so the three of them, Belinda, Charlotte, and Jane, were at the castle. But afterwards, I went to LA and wrote with Jane and Charlotte a song called, actually originally it was titled There You Are, and it ended up being changed to Here You Are. But it was an idea I had for a title. I remember a girl I dated years and years and years ago. She was never happy in her life, and she said one day she was going to go to Europe because she thinks she could be happy there. And I said to her, just doesn't matter where you go, there you are, And I kind of thought, oh, that sounds like a song. And years later, I suggested the title to Charlotte and Jane, There You Are, and they thought Here You Are was a better version of that. So we wrote the song, and it was on their album. It was called the album was called God Bless the Go-Go's. But really enjoyed Charlotte and Jane and Belinda. We had fun in France, had fun in LA. They're again just sweet people, hugely talented. And then years later, I'm staying working on a musical. Bryan and I are writing a Broadway musical based on Pretty Woman, the film. And I'm staying in a hotel on West 44th in New York, and the Hudson Theater is almost next door. I come out one morning and I see in lights the Go-Go's musical, and I thought, oh, that's cool. So I called or sent an email to Jane saying, wow, congratulations on having a musical on Broadway. And she wrote me back and said, congratulations on having a song in our musical. So I didn't realize that my song, Here You Are, was in a musical. So I went and saw the show, and it was actually really, really good.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, mentioning Broadway, you mentioned Pretty Woman. Tell us about You and I.
Well, Pretty Woman was an interesting thing. I mean, talking about changing gears, from Michael Buble to Kiss to Alice Cooper to, say, Anne Murray. Well, musical theater is a whole other thing. So Bryan and I got asked, the original Pretty Woman movie with Richard Gere and Julia Roberts was directed by Gary Marshall. And Gary got in touch with us through his director to see if we'd be interested. Jerry Mitchell was the director, to see if we'd be interested in writing some songs for the Broadway version of Pretty Woman. And the soundtrack for Pretty Woman had some great songs in it, but they wanted to do all new original material for the musical theater version. So Bryan and I, we were actually in London at the time and met with the director over there. And he said, he kind of gave us an overview of his vision of how the musical theater would be. And there's going to be singing and dancing, I mean, as you can imagine with the Broadway show.
Right.
So he kind of walked us through what would eventually be the opening act or the opening number, and said, do you think you guys would be interested? So we said, we'll try. We knew this wasn't our wheelhouse, but we'll try.
But
so
you like a challenge.
What's that?
But you like a challenge.
Yeah, love the challenge. Yeah. So we went away. This was in November 2015, I think it was, or maybe earlier. We went away and we wrote a couple of things that we thought might work. And then a few months later, the director was in New York, so we met with him there at his apartment and played him what we had come up with. And it was an audition. We weren't hired yet by any stretch. It was like, just kind of, what do you think? And he loved it. He said, he hired us on the spot. Wow. So that was the beginning of 3 years of the most intense work I've ever done in my career. It was not just the writing that was exhausting. It was the rewriting. So we'd, write a song, put our heart and soul into it, as we always do, no matter what we're writing. And it would be great for a week. And then the director would go, it needs this and this. And you go back and rewrite it, and it'd be great for a week. And then we'd rewrite it again. And then the director would throw it out and say, we need a whole new song. So to get 20 songs, we ended up writing 40 songs. Wow. And those 40 songs, we probably wrote each of them 3 times. So it was a huge amount of work. And I was reminded of a carpenter friend of mine, a really talented carpenter, does great work. He says, if you ask me to build something, he said, I'll do a great job for you the first time. But if you ask me to rip it out and do it again, I'll do a pretty good job for you the second time. But if you ask me to rip it out and do it a third time, I'm starting to lose my and that was kind of what happened over the 3 years working on Pretty Woman. Was it just kind of wears you down. Right. And I think there are guys, composers that do that all the time and are accustomed to the brain damage. But man, it really burned me out. Bryan and I kind of took turns getting burned out, and we'd hold the other guy hold the other guy up, and then he'd be fine for a while. Then one of us, back and forth. We got through it. The show ran on Broadway for a year and was a success. And then it was running in London when the pandemic hit. We were selling out every night in London, getting good reviews, and then the pandemic hit and the show had to close. So it's going to open up again, hopefully later this year, fingers crossed if all goes well. And it'll run in London, and then they got plans for Spain and Scandinavia and LA, San Francisco. They're going to open up shows all over the world. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
Well, tell me this, Jim, after your experience writing the songs for that, writing 120 songs to get 40, can we expect another Broadway musical from you?
Never again. That was my one and only. I mean, I'm glad I did it. It was a challenge. I learned a lot, met some great people. I mean, these kids that sing and dance, they are so talented. I mean, they're just amazing. And I feel so bad because they're all out of work now. There's no work for them, and it's tough times. But again, met some really great people. Learned a lot. It's a steep learning curve. But no, I wouldn't do it again.
Yeah, I had a feeling that was going to be your answer. Well, tell you what, Jim, we got through quite a few songs. So I'll tell you what, we'll wrap this one up at this point. As always, you're always welcome to come back. In the meantime, we've had across the bottom of the screen throughout the show at times, everybody can go to jimvallance.com, where you've got all the info on all the songs, people there. If you're into the story behind it, it's a great place to go, jimvallance.com. So on that note, everybody, I want to thank you for joining us for this edition of the show. Jim, as always, thank you for being here with us. Everybody, have a good night.
Me. Good. Nice. Good fun. Thanks.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time. For Music Night at the Majestic, this is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.